The night was calm in a quiet Oregon suburb, the kind where shadows stretch long and still across manicured lawns. Families slept, locked away in their dreams, when suddenly screams tore through the silence. High-pitched, frantic, they clawed at the air. Inside one house, the sharp sting of burning flesh hung heavy. A man staggered, his face melting under a stream of acid, his cries swallowed by the walls. His wife, Elena Voss, stood over him, her hands steady, a vial emptied of its poison. This wasn't a burst of rage. It was cold, calculated revenge. Marcus Hale, a respected fire captain, was now a victim of the woman he'd vowed to love. But this story doesn't begin with the acid. It begins with two cheating souls, a third player pulling strings, and a tangle of secrets so thick no one saw the end coming. Infidelity can break a home. But what happens when guilt stains every hand? By dawn, a family lay in ruins, and the truth was a jagged mess. Welcome to Unreal Minds, where we untangle the darkest threads. Hit like, subscribe, and ring the bell. This one's a ride you can't step off. In Portland, Oregon, where the rain falls steady and the city hums with unspoken dreams, Elena Voss stood as a beacon of brilliance. A chemist whose mind unraveled mysteries others couldn't touch, she carried herself with a grace that turned heads and silenced rooms. Her life was a portrait of triumph, a career that gleamed with accolades, two children whose laughter filled a pristine home, and a husband whose name echoed through the streets. Marcus Hale, the fire captain with medals pinned to his chest, walked tall, a man forged in courage, his charisma a flame that drew everyone near. Together they were the couple Portland admired, their days a seamless dance of success, their home a fortress of order and light. But beneath the surface, the truth waited. Elena and Marcus weren't bound by devotion. They were locked in a silent agreement, a marriage stitched together for show. Each held a secret, a jagged edge tucked out of sight, sharp enough to cut through everything they'd built. Their laughter rang hollow. Their glances slid past one another. The walls of their perfect home whispered doubts, and the air between them carried a weight no one else could see. And then there was her, a woman poised on the edge of their world, her shadow already stretching closer. She didn't come to blend in or bow to their rules. She came to tear them apart. By the end of this night, Elena would find a message slipped under her door, its words a quiet threat Marcus would never see coming. Elena Voss thought she held a secret, one she cradled close, feeding it with every stolen moment. The late nights with Lila Kane had become her lifeline, a thread she followed through the dark corners of her own longing. She'd sit across from Marcus at breakfast, his questions about her day met with a smile and a lie so smooth it felt like truth. Each word she spoke tightened the knot inside her, but she couldn't stop. Lila's pull was too strong, her voice a whisper that echoed long after she'd gone. Marcus, though, had begun to drift. His eyes, once fixed on Elena, now wandered, to the woman who appeared at the edges of his world. Lila Kane slipped into his days with ease, a chance meeting at the gallery turning into coffee, then drinks. She laughed at his stories, her fingers lingering on his arm just long enough to leave a mark. He told himself it was harmless, a distraction from the quiet that had settled at home. But every glance from Lila carried weight, every word a step closer to a line he didn't see. What neither knew was how close they stood to the same flame. Lila moved between them with a grace that hid her hunger, her days split between Elena's trembling hands and Marcus's steady gaze. She collected their secrets like photographs, arranging them in her mind with care. The message Elena had left under her own door, a folded note she'd written in a rush, still sat unread, its ink smudged by the rain. "We need to stop," it said, a plea she'd meant to deliver but never did. And then, on a night thick with fog, Marcus found something, a stranger's scarf tangled in the coat rack, its scent sharp and unfamiliar. He held it in his hands, turning it over, the question forming slow and heavy in his chest. Lila watched from across the city, her phone silent, her breath steady. She'd left it there, a breadcrumb in a game neither Elena nor Marcus knew they were playing. Two threads, one hand pulling them tight, and a truth waiting to snap them both. Elena Voss stepped through her front door, the weight of the day falling away. She'd left the lab early, eager for the warmth of her children's voices, the comfort of their small hands tugging at her coat. But the house greeted her with silence, thick, heavy, pressing against her ears. No laughter rang out, no clatter of toys. She glanced at the clock. Marcus should be here. The kids settled for the night. The stillness hung like a held breath. She moved upstairs, her footsteps soft on the carpet, her hand brushing the banister. The bedroom door stood slightly open, a thin line of light cutting through the shadows. She nudged it wider, and the air left her lungs. There on her bed, Marcus Hale lay tangled in the sheets, his bare shoulders glistening with sweat. And beside him, Lila Kane, her Lila, smiled, her fingers tracing his chest, her laugh a quiet ripple in the dim room. The woman Elena had poured her soul into, the one she'd risked it all for, now claimed by her husband. The world tilted. Elena's chest tightened, her pulse hammering in her throat. She didn't speak. She didn't shout. Her eyes locked on them, Lila's widening in shock, Marcus turning, his grin dissolving as he met her gaze. The betrayal carved through her, sharp and cold, each second stretching into an eternity. Her hand moved before her mind caught up, closing around the bottle on the dresser. Hydrochloric acid, a piece of her lab brought home, once harmless, now heavy with intent. Marcus stumbled up, his voice breaking. "Elena, no!" But the words drowned in the roar inside her head. She tilted the bottle, and the liquid spilled out, gleaming as it arced through the air. It struck his face, and the room erupted. His scream clawed at the walls, a jagged animal sound, his hands flying to his skin as it blistered and peeled. The flesh bubbled, dissolving under the burn, his eyes wild with pain. Lila scrambled away, her bare feet pounding the floor, vanishing down the stairs and into the night. The bottle slipped from Elena's grasp, shattering on the hardwood. She stood there, rooted, the echo of Marcus's cries fading into a hollow quiet. His body slumped, trembling, the air thick with the sharp sting of acid and ruin. Outside, faint sirens pierced the distance, growing louder, closer. The law was coming. Someone had heard, someone had called. The house held its breath, but the silence lied. This was no end, only the edge of something vast and unrelenting, waiting to swallow them all. The bottle rolled slowly across the hardwood, its glass scraping faintly against the floor, stopping just shy of Marcus Hale's outstretched fingers. He lay crumpled on the bed, his chest heaving, each breath a jagged gasp that seemed to tear through him. His face, once carved with authority, was now a nightmare of melted skin, the acid having chewed through flesh until his features blurred into a grotesque mask. One eye stared blankly, clouded white, the other buried beneath swollen lids. Paramedics swarmed the room, their boots pounding the floor, their hands quick but trembling as they pressed gauze to the wreckage of his face. They shouted stats to one another, pulse weak, pressure dropping, but their voices couldn't drown out the truth. Marcus Hale, the man who'd walked through fire, was slipping away, his life leaking out with every shuddering exhale. Elena Voss stood motionless in the corner, her back flat against the wall, the empty bottle dangling from her fingers. Her face was a blank slate, no tears, no screams, just a hollow stare fixed on the chaos she'd set loose. The paramedics darted around her, their glances sharp but fleeting, as if she were a ghost they couldn't quite place. Outside, the night pulsed with the wail of sirens, drawing closer, their sound clawing through the walls. The law was nearly here, its weight already pressing down on the room, but Elena didn't stir. Her stillness was a wall, shutting out the storm she'd summoned, and in her grip, the bottle gleamed faintly, its label peeling where her thumb had rubbed it raw. Lila Kane had fled into the shadows, her bare feet slapping against the cold grass as she stumbled to her car. Her hands shook as she dialed 911, her voice breaking over the line. "She threw acid on him! Oh God, his face!" The operator's calm replies crackled through the static, but Lila's words dissolved into sobs, until she hung up. Then silence. She leaned against the car door, her breathing steadying, her fingers brushing the phone screen as it lit up with a new message. Not incoming, but one she'd drafted hours ago, unsent until now. "He's down. Start the clock. She pressed send, her lips twitching into a faint curve, and slipped into the driver's seat, the engine humming to life as she melted into the night. Back in the house, the paramedics hoisted Marcus onto a stretcher, his body limp, his groans swallowed by the hiss of an oxygen mask. They wheeled him out, the clatter of the gurney echoing down the stairs. But the room didn't empty. Elena's gaze shifted, catching a faint sound, a soft scrape, like a chair nudged across the floor. It came from the hallway, beyond the cracked door. The children were there, tucked away in the playroom, their small frames pressed against the wall. They'd heard it all, Marcus's cries, the crash of glass, Elena's final shout. Now they crouched in the dark, their breaths shallow, their eyes wide with questions they couldn't yet ask. Elena's hand tightened on the bottle, her knuckles whitening. The damage wasn't just on the bed, it was seeping into the bones of this house, into the lives she'd tethered to her own. The police lights slashed through the windows, painting the walls in red and blue. Boots thumped on the porch, fists banged on the door, voices barking orders that cut through the haze. Officers would storm in any moment, their questions piercing, their hands ready to drag her away. But the real fight loomed larger, waiting in a courtroom where every word would twist and every scar would scream. And then another sound, a phone buzzing, faint but insistent, from Marcus's coat pocket where it lay crumpled on the floor. The screen glowed, a single line visible. Payment received. Phase 2 begins. Sent 20 minutes ago, from a number Elena didn't know, but one Marcus clearly did. Out in the city, Lila Kane drove through the empty streets, her headlights cutting through the fog. She didn't glance back. Her phone buzzed again, a reply this time. Good. Keep her in play. She nodded to herself, her fingers tapping the wheel. The night wasn't over. It was shifting, tilting towards something bigger, something Marcus might not survive to see. And Elena? She stood alone now, the bottle slipping from her hand, crashing to the floor as the door burst open. The police flooded in, but her eyes stayed on that coat, on the message that changed everything. Someone else was pulling strings, and the ruins weren't just hers. They were shared. The courtroom buzzed like a hive under strain, every corner packed with onlookers, their whispers sharp against the wood-paneled walls. Elena Voss sat at the center of it all, her posture stiff, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles gleamed white. The nation couldn't look away. Televisions flickered in every home. Headlines screamed her name. A brilliant scientist turned monster, or a woman broken by betrayal. The question pulsed through the air, thick and unrelenting, as camera lenses zoomed in on her pale, unreadable face. She didn't flinch, didn't blink, just stared ahead, a statue carved from silence. The jury watched her every breath, searching for a crack, while outside the world held its own trial in the court of opinion. The prosecution stepped forward, their lead attorney a figure of cold precision, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. Elena Voss didn't stumble into this, she said, gesturing to a vial of hydrochloric acid displayed on the evidence table. She's a chemist, a mind trained to understand every reaction, every consequence. This wasn't a burst of rage, it was vengeance, measured out in milliliters. She paused, letting the words settle, then turned to the jury. She chose acid, not to kill, but to destroy. To leave Marcus Hale alive, scarred, a living testament to her fury. That's not passion, that's a plan. The jurors shifted, some scribbling notes, others staring at Elena, their faces hardening as the image of a calculating scientist took root. The defense rose to meet the charge. Elena's attorney, a man with fire in his eyes and a tremor in his voice. Look at her, he urged, pointing to his client. Does she look like a mastermind? She's a woman who walked into her own home and found her husband tangled with Lila Kane, the friend she'd trusted, the lover she'd sacrificed for. That kind of betrayal doesn't leave room for plans, it leaves chaos. He approached Elena, his tone softening. What did you see that night, Elena? Her head lifted, her voice a fragile thread. I saw them, together. I saw everything I'd built turn to ash. She stopped, her eyes glistening, and the attorney pressed on. And what did you feel? A beat passed, then she murmured, lost. like I'd vanished. The room went quiet, the jury caught between her words and the weight of her stillness, unsure if they'd heard a confession or a plea. Then Marcus Hale rolled in, his wheelchair creaking against the polished floor, his face swathed in bandages that couldn't hide the ruin beneath. The courtroom held its breath as he reached the stand, his hands trembling on the armrests. "She stole my life," he rasped, each word scraping out like gravel. "I can't work. I can't face my own reflection. My kids, they cry when they see me." His voice broke, tears seeping into the gauze, and the jury recoiled, some covering their mouths, others staring in horror at the man the acid had left behind. Elena's gaze dropped to her hands, her fingers twitching, the first sign of movement all day. Marcus leaned forward, his breath ragged. "She wanted me to suffer, and she got it." The silence that followed was suffocating, every juror's face a mirror to his pain, every glance at Elena laced with new questions. But the trial wasn't just about Elena and Marcus. Not anymore. Lila Kane's absence cast a shadow no one could ignore. The woman who'd lit the fuse and disappeared. Where was she? Witnesses swore she'd fled the city. Others claimed she'd never left. The police had no leads. The defense no answers. Then, as the fourth day dawned, a clerk handed the judge a folded paper, his hands unsteady. The judge read it, his brow furrowing, and passed it to Elena's attorney. "You'll want to see this," he muttered. The attorney unfolded it, a single line scrawled in sharp slanted ink. "Marcus knows where the money went. Ask him about the vault." The courtroom didn't hear it, but Elena's head snapped up, her eyes darting to Marcus, who shifted in his seat, his bandaged hands clenching. Money? Vault? The attorney's jaw tightened, sensing a thread he hadn't pulled. Before anyone could act, a new witness was called. A thin man in a gray suit, clutching a briefcase stacked with bank records. "I handled their accounts," he said, his voice clipped. "Mr. Hale and Ms. Kane had a joint fund. Hundreds of thousands, siphoned from Elena's research grants over years." Gasps erupted, the jury leaning forward as the banker flipped open a ledger. It was emptied 2 days before the attack, transferred offshore, by Mr. Hale. Marcus's head jerked, his raspy denial lost in the uproar. Elena's attorney seized the moment, wheeling on Marcus. "Did you and Lila plan to run? Did she leave you behind?" Marcus stammered. No, that's not." But the judge's gavel slammed, silencing him. In the chaos, a figure slipped through the back. An older woman, her coat too heavy for the summer heat, a scarf pulled low over her eyes. She lingered by the door, watching Marcus, then vanished as the crowd surged. The note, the money, the vault. It all pointed somewhere new, somewhere tangled in lies Marcus hadn't confessed. And Lila? A cab driver swore he'd dropped her at a private airstrip the night of the attack, but the plane's logs were missing. The jury didn't know that yet, but Elena did. Her attorney whispered it as the banker stepped down, and her face changed, a flicker of something sharp cutting through her calm. The verdict loomed just hours away, but the air grew heavier with every tick of the clock. The banker's record sat open, untouched, as the prosecution scrambled to redirect. Marcus's bandages hid more than scars now. They hid answers. And out there, somewhere, Lila Kane watched it all unfold, her shadow stretching longer than anyone knew. The judge called order, but the real question lingered. Who'd burned who in this wreckage of trust? The gavel fell, and the room braced for the truth, or whatever piece of it would spill next. The courtroom buzzed, a hive of whispers as Elena Voss sat motionless, her eyes like glass. The nation hung on every word, genius chemist or broken soul. The prosecution leaned in, voice cold. She mixed that acid herself. She knew it would destroy him. This was revenge, pure and deliberate. Jurors shifted, their stares heavy on her. The defense fired back, sharp and urgent. Betrayal broke her. Marcus and Lila Kane, tangled in her own bed. That's not a plan. That's a heart snapping. Elena's lips tightened, just a flicker. Then Marcus Hale rolled forward, a wreck of bandages, his voice a jagged whisper. She took everything. My face, my family. The jury flinched, eyes wide at the wreckage of him. Elena's hand twitched, a thread of her calm unraveling. The verdict edged closer, but a question gnawed. Where was Lila Kane? The spark of this chaos, gone without a trace. A bailiff slid a folded paper to the judge, who scanned it, jaw tight. "Counsel, approach," he snapped. The defense attorney read it, then turned, voice rising. "Marcus, explain the $200,000 wired to Lila days before this happened." The room erupted, gasps bouncing off the walls. Marcus stammered. "That's nonsense." But his bandaged fists clenched hard. Outside, a figure lingered, hood up, eyes glinting. She vanished into the dusk as shouts echoed from within. The truth was tilting, and Lila Kane's absence screamed louder than ever. The courtroom froze as the word landed. Guilty. Elena Voss nodded, a shell of herself, her 12-year sentence swallowing her whole. Her children, safe from the nightmare, orphaned by a single strike. Marcus Hale sat broken, bandages veiling a face no one knew anymore. His hero's crown reduced to ashes, his life a ruin. Lila Kane, gone, slipped through the cracks, leaving chaos in her wake. A victor or a venom, no one could say. A marriage stitched with deceit, a lover's cold play, a flash of fury that left scars too deep to heal. Could anyone have turned the tide, or was this end written from the start? Was Elena Voss a woman crushed by betrayal, or a monster who crossed the line? Tell us what you think. Drop it in the comments. If Twisted True Crime keeps you hooked, smash that like button, subscribe, and hit the bell. Unreal Minds has more stories coming your way. Stay with us.